Red Army invaded Finland in November 1939. No one believed the Finns stood much of a chance in this winter war. Well equipped with tanks, artillery, and aircraft, the Soviet forces invaded with 4 armies deployed from north to south. The large-scale offensive on the 9th Army in central Finland surprised the Finnish command. The dense forests and poor road network would make it difficult to deploy a large number of troops in this area. The objective of the 9th Army was to capture Suomussalmi and then advance onto Oulu, which would effectively cut Finland in half at its narrowest point. 2 roads led to Suomussalmi from the Russian frontier. The northern road joined the Palovara crossroads, which then led to Paranka in the north and to Suomussalmi in the south. The southern track was the Raate Road that went straight to Suomussalmi. The 163rd Rifle Division was ordered to take the lead, with 1 regiment driving down the Raate Road and 2 regiments taking the northern route. Initially, the Finns opposed the 2 regiments with a 58-man unit of border guards, which retreated without offering much resistance. In the south, the Finns defended the road only with 2 companies of the 15th Independent Battalion. Even so, the forces on the Raate Road drove only 10 kilometers on the first day of the attack. The slow Soviet progress gave the Finns time to evacuate the civilian population of Suomussalmi, but soon the 2 Finnish companies were forced to withdraw to avoid the flanking maneuvers of the Soviet patrols. On December 6, the Finnish 16th Independent Battalion reached Paranka and started setting up a defensive line. The Soviets showed up soon and began probing attacks against it. After 24 hours of vigorous skirmishing, the Finns held the Soviets in check. Finnish radio teams managed to intercept Soviet messages and learn that the enemy advance had stopped. One such message reported that the men could not advance easily as they lacked felt boots, snowsuits, and rations. Other messages reported of frostbite cases and ambushes. When the Soviets attempted to capture Kitola village and failed with a loss of 150 men, the Finns realized that the 163rd Rifle Division wasn't a particularly tough force. The Soviets in this area went over to the defensive for the rest of the battle, which allowed the Finns to concentrate on the 2 regiments headed straight for Suomussalmi. The 3rd Company of the 15th Independent Battalion arrived at the front on December 7th. It was then decided to withdraw the battalion to the south after burning the houses to deny their enemy shelter. Early on December 8th, the village was taken by the Soviets. On the same day, the Finnish 27th Infantry Regiment arrived to recapture the village and drive the enemy back to the border. On December 11th, the Finns attacked and reached a natural choke point between the 2 frozen lakes to the east of Suomussalmi. They set up a roadblock there and brought machine gun teams forward, knowing that the Soviets could either drop off their heavy equipment across the lakes and walk through the woods, or attack the machine guns head-on. The main force of the 27th Regiment attempted to recapture the village the next day. Although the attack failed, the 163rd Division was now trapped, since the Finns had captured the road leading into the village and were watching all other possible escape routes. Finnish attacks to recapture Suomussalmi, along with attacks against the enemy supply route, continued until December 16th, when it became clear that it was impossible to recapture the village without artillery support and additional reinforcements. The 2nd Battery of the 9th Artillery Regiment arrived on December 17th to support the attack, while the 3rd Battery arrived on December 19th. The 27th Regiment was then ordered to attack on December 20th. This time, the attacking battalions reached the Soviet trenches, but were soon driven back by a counterattack supported by tanks. The 27th Regiment canceled further attacks, knowing that a substantial number of troops were on their way to the area. Meanwhile, on the Raate Road, Finnish patrols spotted the first elements of the arriving 44th Rifle Division and began striking at their flanks to delay their advance. On December 21st, the Finns completed their new attack plans, which included the deployment of 2 newly arrived regiments. The 65th Regiment was deployed in Paranka, while the 64th would assist in the attack on Suomussalmi. Their next attack was originally planned on December 26th, but the trapped Soviets decided to attempt a breakout on Christmas Eve, and in coordination with an attack by the 44th Division. The attack of the 44th, however, was cancelled when the supply columns to the rear were ambushed by Finnish patrols. The 163rd fought alone until nightfall and renewed the attack on Christmas Day. In their second assault, the Soviets attempted to cross the frozen lake to the west. The Finns were baffled by this move. It seemed as though the Soviets were trying to make a loop around the Finnish line. Soviet prisoners later claimed that magnetic ores in Finland's lakes led their compasses astray. Others said that the compasses didn't work at all. Even so, the Soviets charged across the ice in brown uniforms and came under heavy fire. By now, the 163rd Division was running out of food as well as ammunition. On December 27th, the Finns launched their final assault, backed by all 8 of their artillery pieces. The Soviets proved tenacious in defense despite their hunger, cold, and lack of ammunition. The battle continued until December 29th, when the defenses cracked and the 163rd Division broke into groups, fleeing across the frozen lake towards their supply dump in the north. At this point, the Finnish Air Force made a rare appearance, as 2 of its British-made Blenheim bombers swooped in and dropped bombs on the ice, smashing holes that sent men, vehicles, and sleds into the lake. The few Soviet troops who survived and didn't escape were relieved to be taken prisoner. Many were suffering from frostbite. They also told their captors about bad food and bad leadership. One prisoner in particular said he had been visiting a shop in a town near Leningrad just before the war broke out, buying his wife a new pair of shoes. The local commissar spotted him and dragooned the man into the army on the spot, asking to know why such a fine specimen of Soviet manhood was not marching to the aid of the oppressed Finnish proletariat. The prisoner marched into Finland without 1 hour's formal military training. Now it was time to dispose of the 44th Rifle Division. The first attack was launched on January 1, 1940, with a battalion of the 27th Regiment at the tip of the enemy column. From their start line, the Finns could see roaring log fires by the Soviets, who were desperately trying to stay warm. As the infantry charged the road, the engineers followed to blow up trees and create roadblocks that would prevent tanks and armored vehicles from intervening. By dawn, the spearhead of the 44th Division had been cut off from its tail, suffering the loss of 100 men, several vehicles, and a field kitchen for the loss of 2 Finns. On January 4th, the 65th Regiment arrived to press the attack from the north with the support of 6 out of 8 available artillery pieces. 5 more battalions arrived to launch additional attacks farther east, supported by the 2 remaining artillery pieces. Although these attacks divided the 44th Division into 7 separate resistance pockets, the Finns suffered enough casualties to limit themselves to small-scale attacks from now on. With the Soviets unable to move, the Finns concentrated their attack on the weakest resistance pockets, while the strongest were left to freeze and starve out. Wounded men on the Soviet side were doomed. Even a small injury, mostly frostbite, could prove fatal as medics struggled in an unequal battle against gangrene. Adding to the Soviet terrors were the long subarctic winter nights and Finnish snipers. Every time a Finnish sniper fired a bullet, panic-stricken Soviets would fire everything they had for as long as 15 minutes, causing no casualties and wasting ammunition. On January 4th, the commander of the 44th Division, Alexei Vinogradov, sent a message to the 9th Army requesting discretion to act on his own initiative. The request was denied, but on January 6th, after a further exchange of messages, Vinogradov was allowed to make a tactical withdrawal. The division did not withdraw. Vinogradov ordered his men to flee for their lives. It was every man for himself. Among those who managed to escape to Russia was Vinogradov himself and 2 of his staff members. They were later court-martialed and executed in front of the survivors of their division. The Finns hunted the remnants of the 44th Division for 2 days and took over 1,000 prisoners. The prisoners were terrified that they would be tortured and shot. The Finns assured their captives such was not the case. The prisoners were astonished when the Finns provided them warm clothing and hot food. They had assumed that the Finns were starving and whipped under a fascist tyranny. As the 44th Division disintegrated, the victorious Finns took possession of vast amounts of abandoned equipment, which included 43 tanks, 270 vehicles of different types, over 600 rifles, and 52 machine guns. For many years, Finnish historians estimated the Soviet losses to be around 17,000 men. The estimation was based on the interrogation of the prisoners. Recent studies indicate that the Soviets lost at least 7,000 men, while Finnish casualties amounted to 900 killed and 1,700 wounded. 2 Soviet divisions had been wiped off the map, utterly destroyed by a far smaller and poorly equipped force. Only in mobility, leadership, and morale were the Finns superior to the Soviets. Once the Finnish troops cut the Soviets off from their supplies, denied them hot meals, and rendered them immobile, they had no chance. It was one of the greatest victories in the history of warfare. After the end of the battle, the Finns fired artillery shells filled with photographs of dead Soviet troops at the Russian front lines, bearing a simple slogan: White Death.